Good morning and welcome back to Reading Wikis for You, where we read the wiki articles for you. And today, in continuation of our spooky Fridays for Halloween, we're going to be reading about that classic monster, Count Dracula. So, as we get started, go ahead and drop a comment down below with what you'd like us to read next, and let's get into it. Count Dracula is the title character of Bram Stoker's 1897 Gothic horror novel, Dracula. He is considered the prototypical and archetypical vampire in subsequent works of fiction. Aspects of the character are believed by some to have been inspired by the 15th century Wallachian prince Vlad the Impaler, who was also known as Vlad Dracula, and by Sir Henry Irving and Jacques de Mala, actors with aristocratic backgrounds that Stoker had met during his life. Count Dracula is also one of the best known fictional figures of the Victorian era. One of Dracula's most famous powers is his ability to turn others into vampires by biting them and infecting them with the vampiric disease. Other characteristics have been added or altered in subsequent popular fictional works, including books, films, cartoons, and video games. Stoker's creation. Bram Stoker's novel takes the form of an epistolary tale in which Count Dracula's characteristics, powers, abilities, and weaknesses are narrated by multiple narrators from different perspectives. Count Dracula is an undead, centuries-old vampire and a Transylvanian nobleman who claims to be descended from descended from Attila the Hun. He inhabits a decaying castle in the Carpathian Mountains near the Borgo Pass. Unlike the vampires of Eastern European folklore, which are portrayed as repulsive, corpse-like creatures, Dracula is handsome and charismatic with a veneer of aristocratic charm. In his conversations with Jonathan Harker, he reveals himself as deeply proud of his boyar heritage and nostalgic for his past, which he admits has become only a memory of heroism, honor, and valor in modern times. The character of Count Dracula, created by Stoker, has become one of the best-known fictional figures of the Victorian era. Early life. Details of his early life are undisclosed, but it is mentioned that, quote, he was in life a most wonderful man, soldier, statesman, and alchemist, which latter was the highest development of the scientific knowledge of his time. He had a mighty brain, a learning beyond compare, and a heart that knew no fear and no remorse. There was no branch of knowledge of his time that he did not essay, unquote. Dracula studied the black arts at the Academy of Scholomance in the Carpathian Mountains overlooking the town of Cebu, also known as Hermannstadt, and has a deep knowledge of alchemy and magic. Taking up arms as befitting his rank and status as a voivode, he led his troops against the Turks across the Danube. According to his nemesis Abraham van Helsing, quote, he must indeed have been that voivode Dracula who won his name against the Turk over the great river on the very frontier of Turkeyland. If it be so, then he was no common man, for in that time and for centuries after he was spoken of as the cleverest and most cunning, as well as the bravest of the sons of the land beyond the forest, unquote. Dead and buried in a great tomb in the chapel of his castle, Dracula returns from death as a vampire and lives for several centuries in his castle with 3 terrifyingly beautiful female vampires beside him. Narrative, short story. In Dracula's Guest, the narrative follows an unnamed Englishman traveler as he wanders around Munich before leaving for Transylvania. It is Walpurgis night, and the young Englishman foolishly leaves his hotel in spite of the coachman's warnings, and wanders through a dense forest alone. Along the way, he feels that he is being watched by a tall and thin stranger. The short story climaxes in an old graveyard where the Englishman encounters a sleeping female vampire called Countess Dollingen in a marble tomb with a large iron stake driven into it. This malevolent, beautiful vampire awakens from her marble bier to conjure a snowstorm before being struck by lightning and returning to her eternal prison. The Englishman's troubles are not quite over, as he is dragged away by an unseen force and rendered unconscious. He awakens to find a gigantic wolf lying on his chest and licking his throat. It keeps him warm and protects him until help arrives. When the Englishman is finally taken back to his hotel, a telegram awaits him from his expectant host, Dracula, with a warning about, quote, dangers from snow and wolves and night, unquote. Novel. In Dracula, the eponymous vampire has decided to move from Transylvania to London. He summons Jonathan Harker, a newly qualified English solicitor, to provide legal support for a real estate transaction overseen by Harker's employer. Dracula at first charms Harker with his cordiality and historical knowledge, and even rescues him from the clutches of the 3 female vampires in the castle. In truth, Dracula wishes to keep Harker alive long enough to complete the legal transaction and learn as much as possible about England. Dracula leaves his castle and boards a Russian ship, the Demeter, taking along with him 50 boxes of Transylvanian soil which he needs to regain his strength and rest during daylight. During the voyage to Whitby, a coastal town in northern England, he sustains himself on the ship's crew members. Only one body is later found, that of the captain, who is found tied up to the ship's helm. The captain's log is recovered and tells of strange events that had taken place during the ship's journey. Dracula leaves the ship in the form of a dog and runs up the 199 steps to the graveyard of St. Mary's Church in the shadow of the Whitby Abbey ruins. Soon the Count begins menacing Harker's fiancée, Wilhelmina Mina Murray, and her friend Lucy Westenra. There is also a notable link between Dracula and Renfield, a patient in an insane asylum overseen by John Seward, who is compelled to consume spiders, birds, and other creatures, in ascending order of size, to absorb their, quote, life force. Renfield acts as a kind of censor, reacting to Dracula's proximity and supplying clues accordingly. Dracula visits Lucy's bedchamber on a nightly basis, draining her of blood, while simultaneously infecting her with the curse of vampirism. Not knowing the cause for Lucy's deterioration, her 3 suitors, Seward, Arthur Holmwood, and Quincy Morris, call upon Seward's mentor, the Dutch doctor Abraham Van Helsing. Van Helsing soon deduces her condition's supernatural origins, and tries to keep the vampire at bay with garlic. Nevertheless, Dracula attacks Lucy's house one final time, killing her mother, and transforming Lucy herself into one of the undead. Harker escapes Dracula's castle and returns to England, barely alive and deeply traumatized. On Seward's suggestion, Mina seeks Van Helsing's assistance in assessing Harker's health. She reads his journal and passes it along to Van Helsing. This unfolds the first clue to the identity of Lucy's assailant, which later prompts Mina to collect all of the events of Dracula's appearance in news articles, saved letters, newspaper clippings, and the journals of each member of the group. This assists the group in investigating Dracula's movements and later discovering that Renfield's behavior is directly influenced by Dracula. They then discover that Dracula has purchased a residence next door to Seward's. The group gathers intelligence to track down Dracula and destroy him. After the undead Lucy attacks several children, Van Helsing, Seward, Holmes, and Morris enter her crypt and destroy her to save her soul. Later, Harker joins them and the party works to discover Dracula's intentions. Harker aids the party in tracking down the locations of the boxes to the various residences of Dracula and discovers that Dracula purchased multiple real estate properties throughout London under the alias Count de Ville. Dracula's main plan was to remove each of his 50 boxes of earth to his various properties in order to arrange multiple layers throughout and around the perimeter of London. The party pries open each of the graves and places sacramental wafers within each of them and seals them shut. This deprives Dracula of his ability to seek safety in those boxes. Dracula gains entry into Seward's residence by coercing an invitation out of Renfield. As he attempts to enter the room in which Harker and Mina are staying, Renfield tries to stop him. Dracula then mortally wounds him. With his dying breath, Renfield tells Seward and Van Helsing that Dracula is after Mina. Van Helsing and Seward discover Dracula biting Mina and forcing her to drink his blood. The group repels Dracula using crucifixes and sacramental bread, forcing him to flee by turning into a dark vapor. The party continues to hunt Dracula to search for his remaining lairs. Although Dracula's baptism of Mina grants him a telepathic link to her, it backfires when Van Helsing hypnotizes Mina and uses her supernatural link with Dracula to track him as he flees back to Transylvania. The heroes follow Dracula back to Transylvania, and in a climactic battle with Dracula's Romani bodyguards, finally destroy him. Despite the popular image of Dracula having a stake driven through his heart to kill him, Mina's narrative describes his decapitation by Harker's kukri, while Morris simultaneously pierces his heart with a bowie knife. Mina Harker's journal, 6 November, Dracula, chapter 27. His body then turns to dust, but not before Mina sees an expression of peace on his face. Characteristics. Although early in the novel, Dracula dons a mask of cordiality, he often flies into fits of rage when his plans are frustrated. When Dracula's brides attempt to seduce Jonathan Harker, Dracula physically assaults one and ferociously berates them for their insubordination. Dracula has an appreciation for ancient architecture and prefers purchasing old houses, saying, quote, "A new home would kill me," and that it takes a century to make one habitable. Dracula is very proud of his warrior heritage, proclaiming his pride to Harker on how the Zelki people are infused with the blood of heroes. He also expresses an interest in the history of the British Empire, speaking admirably of of its people. He has a somewhat primal and predatory worldview, pities ordinary humans for their revulsion to their darker impulses, feels human emotions, and often says that he can love. Although usually portrayed as having a strong Eastern European accent, the original novel only specifies that his spoken English is excellent, though strangely toned. His appearance varies in age. He is described early in the novel as thin, with a long white mustache, pointed ears, and sharp teeth. It is also noted later in the novel, chapter 11, subsection, quote, "The Escaped Wolf," by a zookeeper who sees him that he has a hooked nose and a pointed beard with a streak of white in it. He is dressed all in black and has hair on his palms. Harker describes him as an old man, cruel-looking, and giving an effect of extraordinary pallor. Quote, "I saw Count Dracula, with red light of triumph in his eyes, and with a smile that Judas in hell might be proud of," unquote. Jonathan Harker's Journal, Dracula, Chapter 4. As the novel progresses, Dracula is described as taking on a more and more youthful appearance. After Harker strikes him with a shovel, he is left with a scar on his forehead which he bears throughout the course of the novel. Dracula also possesses great wealth and has Romani people in his homeland who are loyal to him as servants and protectors. Powers and weaknesses. Count Dracula is portrayed in the novel using many different supernatural abilities, and is believed to have gained his abilities through dealings with the devil. Chapter 18 of the novel describes many of the abilities, limitations, and weaknesses of vampires, and Dracula in particular. Dracula has superhuman strength, which according to Van Helsing is equivalent to that of 20 strong men. He does not cast a shadow or have a reflection from mirrors. He is immune to conventional means of attack. A sailor tries to stab him in the back with a knife, but the blade goes through his body as though it is air. He can defy gravity to a certain extent and possesses superhuman agility, able to climb vertical surfaces upside down in a reptilian manner. He can travel onto unhallowed ground, such as the graves of suicides and those of his victims. He has powerful hypnotic, telepathic, and illusionary abilities. He also has the ability to, within limitations, vanish and reappear elsewhere at will. If he knows the path, he can come out from anything or into anything, regardless of how close it is bound, or even if it is soldered shut. Dracula has amassed cunning and wisdom throughout centuries, and is unable to die of senescence. He can command animals such as rats, owls, bats, moths, foxes, and wolves. His control is limited, as seen when the party first enters his house in London. He summons thousands of rats to swarm and attack the group, and Holmwood summons his trio of terriers to battle them. The dogs prove very efficient rat killers. Terrified by their onslaught, the rats flee of their own volition. Dracula can also manipulate the weather and, within his range, is able to direct the elements, such as storms, fog, and mist. Shape-shifting. Dracula can change form at will, able to grow and become small. His featured forms in the novel being that of a bat, a large wolf, and a fog or mist. When the moonlight is shining, he can travel as elemental dust within its rays. He is able to pass through tiny cracks or crevices while retaining his human form or in the form of a vapor. Described by Van Helsing as the ability to slip through a hairbreadth space of a tomb door or coffin. This is also an ability used by his victim Lucy as a vampire. When the party breaks into her tomb, they open the sealed coffin to find her corpse is no longer located within. Vampirism. One of Dracula's powers is the ability to turn others into vampires by biting them. According to Van Helsing, quote, "When they become such, there comes with the change the curse of immortality. They cannot die, but must go on age after age, adding new victims and multiplying the evils of the world. For all that die from the preying of the undead become themselves undead, and prey on their kind. And so the circle goes on, ever widening, like as the ripples from a stone thrown in the water. Friend Arthur, if you had met that kiss which you know of before poor Lucy died, or again last night when you opened your arms to her, you would in time, when you had died, have become Nosferatu, as they call it in Eastern Europe, and would for all time make more of those undeads that have so filled us with horror," unquote. Dr. Seward's Journal, Dracula, Chapter 16. The vampire bite itself does not cause death. It is the method vampires use to drain blood of the victim and to increase their influence over them. This is described by Van Helsing, quote, "The Nosferatu do not die like the bee when he is stung once. He is only stronger, and being stronger have yet more power to work evil," unquote. Dr. Seward's Journal, Dracula, Chapter 18. Victims who are bitten by a vampire and do not die are hypnotically influenced by them. Quote, "Those children whose blood she suck are not yet so much worse, but if she live on, undead more and more lose their blood, and by her power over them they come to her," unquote. Mina Harker's Journal, Dracula, Chapter 18. Van Helsing later describes the aftermath of a bitten victim when the vampire has been killed. Quote, "But if she die in truth, then all cease. The tiny wounds of the throats disappear, and they go back to their plays unknowing of whatever has been," unquote. Mina Harker's Journal, Dracula, Chapter 18. As Dracula slowly drains Lucy's blood, she dies from acute blood loss and later transforms into a vampire, despite the efforts of Seward and Van Helsing to provide her with blood transfusions. He is aided by powers of necromancy and divination of the dead, that all who die by his hand may reanimate and do his bidding. Bloodletting. Dracula requires no other substance but fresh human blood, which has the effect of rejuvenating him and allowing him to grow younger. His power is drawn from the blood of others, and he cannot survive without it. Although drinking blood can rejuvenate his youth and strength, it does not give him the ability to regenerate. Months after being struck on the head by a shovel, he still bears a scar from the impact. Dracula's preferred victims are women. Harker states that he believes Dracula has a state of fasting as well as a state of feeding. He tells Mina exerting his abilities raises a desire to feed. Vampire's baptism of blood. Count Dracula is depicted as the king vampire and can control other vampires. To punish Mina and the party for their efforts against him, Dracula bites her on at least 3 occasions. He also forces her to drink his blood. This act curses her with the effects of vampirism and gives him a telepathic link to her thoughts. Hypnotism only works before dawn. Van Helsing refers to the act of drinking blood by both the vampire and the victim as, quote, "the vampire's baptism of blood," unquote. Quote, "You, their best loved one, are now to me flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood, kin of my kin, my bountiful winepress for a while, and shall be later on my companion and my helper. You shall be avenged in turn, for not one of them shall minister to your needs, but as yet you are to be punished for what you have done. You have aided in thwarting me, now you shall come to my call. When my brain says, 'Come' to you, you shall cross land or sea to do my bidding," unquote. The effects changes Mina physically and mentally over time. A few moments after Dracula attacks her, Van Helsing takes a wafer of sacramental bread and places it on her forehead to bless her. When the bread touches her skin, it burns her and leaves a scar on her forehead. Her teeth start growing longer but do not grow sharper. She begins to lose her appetite, feeling repulsed by normal food. Begins to sleep more and more during the day, cannot wake unless at sunset, and stops writing in her diary. When Van Helsing later crumbles the same bread in a circle around her, she is unable to cross or leave the circle, discovering a new form of protection. Dracula's death would release the curse on any living transformed vampire. Van Helsing reveals that even were he to escape, his continued existence would ensure whether or not he victimized Mina further, she would become a vampire upon her eventual death. Limitations of his powers. Dracula is much less powerful in daylight and is only able to shift his form at dawn, noon, and dusk. He can shift his form freely at night or if he is at his grave. The sun is not fatal to him, as sunlight does not burn and destroy him upon contact, though most of his abilities cease. Quote, "The sun that rose on our sorrow this morning guards us in its course. Until it sets tonight, that monster must retain whatever form he has now. He is confined within the limitations of his earthly envelope. He cannot melt into thin air nor disappear through cracks or chinks or crannies. If he goes through a doorway, he must open the door like a mortal," unquote. Jonathan Harker's Journal, Dracula, Chapter 22. Quote, "His power ceases, as does that of all evil things, at the coming of the day. Only at certain times can he have limited freedom. If he be not at the place whither he is bound, he can only change himself at noon or exact sunrise or sunset," unquote. Mina Harker's Journal, Dracula, Chapter 18. Later interpretations of the character and vampires in general would amplify this trait to an outright fatal weakness, making it so that even the first rays of sunrise are capable of reducing a vampire to ash. He is also limited in his ability to travel, as he can only cross running water at low or high tide. Owing to this, he is unable to fly across a river in the form of a bat or mist, or even by himself board a boat or step off a boat onto a dock unless he is physically carried over with assistance. He is also unable to enter a place unless invited to do so by someone of the household, even a visitor. Once invited, he can enter and leave the premises at will. Weaknesses. Thirst. Dracula is commonly depicted with a bloodlust which he is seemingly unable to control. Adaptations sometimes call this uncontrollable state the thirst. Religious symbolism. There are items which afflict him to the point he has no power and can even calm him from his insatiable appetite for blood. He is repulsed by garlic, as well as sacred items and symbols such as crucifixes and sacramental bread. Quote, "At the instant I saw that the cut had bled a little, and the blood was trickling over my chin, I laid down the razor, turning as I did so half round, to look for some sticking plaster. When the Count saw my face, his eyes blazed with a sort of demoniac fury, and he suddenly made a grab at my throat. I drew away, and his hand touched the string of beads which held the crucifix. It made an instant change in him, for the fury passed so quickly that I could hardly believe that it was ever there." Unquote. Jonathan Harker's Journal, Dracula, Chapter 2. Placing the branch of a wild rose upon the top of his coffin will render him unable to escape it. A sacred bullet fired into the coffin could kill him so that he remained true dead. Mountain ash is also described as a form of protection from a vampire, although the effects are unknown. This was believed to be used as a protection against evil spirits and witches during the Victorian era. Death sleep. The state of rest to which vampires are prone during the day is described in the novel as a death-like sleep in which the vampire sleeps open-eyed, is unable to awaken or move, and also may be unaware of any presence of individuals who may be trespassing. Dracula is portrayed as being active in daylight at least once to pursue a victim. Dracula also purchases many properties throughout London over the counter, which shows that he does have the ability to have some type of presence in daylight. Quote, "On a pile of newly dug earth lay the Count. He was either dead or asleep. I could not say which, for eyes were open and stony, but without the glassiness of death, and the cheeks had the warmth of life through all their pallor. The lips were as red as ever, but there was no sign of movement, no pulse, no breath, no beating of the heart. I bent over him and tried to find any sign of life, but in vain. I thought he might have the keys on him, but when I went to search, I saw the dead eyes, and in them, dead though they were, such a look of hate, though unconscious of me or my presence, that I fled from the place and leaving the Count's room by the window." Unquote. He requires Transylvanian soil to be nearby him in a foreign land, or to be entombed within his coffin within Transylvania in order to successfully rest. Otherwise, he will be unable to recover his strength. This has forced him to transport many boxes of Transylvanian earth to his residences in London. He is most powerful when he is within his earth home, coffin home, hell home, or any place unhallowed. Further, if Dracula or any vampire has had their fill in blood upon feeding, they will be caused to rest in this dead state even longer than usual. Other abilities. While universally feared by the local people of Transylvania and even beyond, Dracula commands the loyalty of the Romani people, as well as a band of Slovaks who transport his boxes on their way to London and to serve as an armed convoy bringing his coffin back to his castle. The Slovaks and Romani appear to know his true nature, for they laugh at Harker when he tries to communicate his plight, and betray Harker's attempt to send a letter through them by giving it to the Count. Dracula seems to be able to hold influence over people with mental disorders, such as Renfield, who is never bitten but who worships Dracula, referring to him over the course of the novel as Master and Lord. Dracula also afflicts Lucy with chronic sleepwalking, putting her into a trance-like state that allows them not only to submit to his will, but also seek him and satisfy his need to feed. Dracula's powers and weaknesses vary greatly in the many adaptations. Previous and subsequent vampires from different legends have had similar vampire characteristics. Character development subsequent to the novel. Dracula has been portrayed by more actors in more visual media adaptations of the novel than any other horror character. Actors who have played him include Max Schreck, Bela Lugosi, John Carradine, Lon Chaney Jr., Christopher Lee, Francis Lederer, Denholm Elliott, Jack Palance, Louis Jordan, Rudolph Martin, Frank Langella, Klaus Kinski, Gary Oldman, Leslie Nielsen, George Hamilton, David Niven, Charles Macaulay, Keith Lee Castle, Ray Liotta, Gerard Butler, Duncan Regier, Richard Roxburgh, Mark Warren, Rutger Hauer, Stephen Billington, Thomas Kretschmann, Dominic Purcell, Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, Luke Evans, Christian Camargo, Claes Bang, Nicolas Cage, Javier Botet, and Bill Skarsgård. In 2003, Count Dracula, as portrayed by Lugosi in the 1931 film, was named as the 33rd greatest movie villain by the AFI. In 2013, Empire magazine ranked Lee's portrayal as Dracula in the 7th greatest horror movie character of all time. The character is loosely associated with the Western cultural archetype of the vampire and remains a popular Halloween costume. Count Dracula appears in Mad Monster Party, voiced by Alan Swift. This version is shown to be wearing a monocle. Count Dracula is among the monsters that Baron Boris von Frankenstein invites to the Isle of Evil to show off the secret of total destruction and announce his retirement from the worldwide organization of monsters. Sesame Street character Count Von Count is based on Bela Lugosi's interpretation of Count Dracula and Jack Davis's design for Dracula from Mad Monster Party. Count Dracula appears in Mad, Mad, Mad Monsters, a prequel of sorts to Mad Monster Party, voiced again by Alan Swift. He and his son are invited by Baron Henry von Frankenstein to attend the wedding of Frankenstein's monster and its mate at the Transylvania Astoria Hotel. Dracula is the primary antagonist of the Castlevania video game series in the first 2 seasons of the Castlevania animated Netflix series. He also appears as Gabriel Belmont, the main protagonist of the Lords of Shadow reboot video game series. Count Dracula appears in the Attack of the Killer Tomatoes episode Spatula, Prince of Darkness, voiced by S. Scott Bullock. He relates a tale of how he once gave Dr. Putrid T. Gangrene a serum to transform tomatoes into vampire tomatoes. Though the doctor refused, Zoltan overheard their conversation and, mistaking the word serum for syrup, ingest the serum himself and renaming himself Spatula, Prince of Darkness, who can turn people into vampires by kissing them in the neck. A stipulation that the censor lady put into place in fear of showing the biting and bloodshed associated with vampires on a Saturday morning cartoon. This spread to other tomatoes and to the entire town. When the sun came up and disabled the vampires, Count Dracula in sunblock appears and deemed that the town is not worthy to be vampires. He then gives Chad Fintletter the antidote to the vampirism and advises that the tomatoes be squashed immediately. Dracula appears as the lead character of Dracula the Undead, a novel by Stoker's great-grandnephew Dacre, presented as a sequel to the original. In the supernatural episode Monster Movie, a shapeshifter that Sam and Dean Winchester fight considers his form of Count Dracula his favorite form. It is in this form that Jamie killed him with Sam's gun loaded with silver bullets. Count Dracula is the main character in the Hotel Transylvania franchise, voiced by Adam Sandler in the first 3 movies and Brian Hull in the 4th movie. Dracula, going by an inversion of his name, Alucard, serves as the main character of the anime and manga series Hellsing and Hellsing Ultimate, where he serves Integra Helsing, Abraham's great-granddaughter, as an anti-vampire warrior devoted to the British crown. Dracula is the primary antagonist of the Showtime series Penny Dreadful, portrayed by Christian Camargo. This version of the character is the brother of Lucifer and thus a fallen angel. Modern and postmodern analyses of the character. Already in 1958, Cecil Kirtley proposed that Count Dracula shared his personal past with the historical Transylvanian-born voivode Vlad III Dracula of Wallachia, also known as Vlad the Impaler or Vlad Tepes. Following the publication of In Search of Dracula by Radu Florescu and Raymond McNally in 1972, this supposed connection attracted much more popular attention. This work argued that Bram Stoker based his Dracula on Vlad the Impaler. Historically, the name Dracula is the family name of Vlad Tepes' family, a name derived from the fraternal order of knights called the Order of the Dragon, founded by Sigismund of Luxembourg, King of Hungary and Bohemia and a Holy Roman Emperor, to uphold Christianity and defend the empire against the Ottoman Turks. Vlad II, the second Dracul, father of Vlad III, was admitted to the order around 1431 because of his bravery in fighting the Turks and was dubbed Dracul, dragon or devil. Thus, his son became Dracula of the Dragon. From 1431 onward, Vlad II wore the emblem of the order, and later, as ruler of Wallachia, his coinage bore the dragon symbol. Stoker came across the name Dracula in his reading on Romanian history, and chose this to replace the name Count Vampir that he had originally intended to use for his villain. Some Dracula scholars, led by Elizabeth Miller, have questioned the depth of this connection as early as 1998. They argue that Stoker in fact knew little of the historic Vlad III, Vlad the Impaler, and that he used only the name Dracula and some miscellaneous scraps of Romanian history. Also, there are no comments about Vlad III in the author's working notes. While having a conversation with Jonathan Harker in Chapter 3, Dracula refers to his own background, and these speeches show elements which Stoker directly copied from an account of the principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia, with various political observations relating to them by William Wilkinson. Stoker mentions the voivode of the Dracula race who fought against the Turks after the defeat of the battle in Kosovo, and was later betrayed by his brother, historical facts which unequivocally point to Vlad III described as Voivode Dracula by Wilkinson. Quote, "Who was it but one of my own race who as voivode crossed the Danube and beat the Turk on his own ground? That was a Dracula indeed. Woe was it that his own unworthy brother, when he had fallen, sold his people to the Turk and brought the shame of slavery on them. Was it not this Dracula indeed who inspired that other of his race, who in a later age again and again brought his forces over the great river into Turkey land, who, when he was beaten back, came again and again, though he had to come alone from the bloody field where his troops were being slaughtered, since he knew that he alone could ultimately triumph?" Chapter 3, page 19. The Count's intended identity is later commented by Professor Van Helsing, referring to a letter from his friend Arminus. Quote, "He must indeed have been that voivode Dracula who won his name against the Turk over the great river on the very frontier of Turkeyland." Unquote. Chapter 18, page 145. This indeed encourages the reader to identify the Count with the voivode Dracula first mentioned by him in Chapter 3, the one betrayed by his brother, Vlad III Dracula. Betrayed by his brother, Radu the Handsome, who had chosen the side of the Turks. But as noted by the Dutch author Hans Corneel de Roos in Chapter 25, Van Helsing and Mina drop this rudimentary connection to Vlad III and instead describe the Count's personal past as that of, quote, that other of his race, unquote, who lived, quote, in a later age, unquote. By smoothly exchanging Vlad III for a nameless double, Stoker avoided his main character being unambiguously linked to a historical person traceable in any history book. Similarly, the novelist did not want to disclose the precise site of the Count's residence, Castle Dracula. As confirmed by Stoker's own handwritten research notes, the novelist had a specific location for the castle in mind while writing the narrative, an empty mountaintop in the Transylvanian Kelemen Alps near the former border with Moldavia. Efforts to promote the Ponari Castle, circa 200 kilometers away from the novel's place of action near the Borgo Pass, as the real Castle Dracula, have no basis in Stoker's writing, although it bears much similarity to the fictional Castle Dracula. No written evidence shows Stoker to have heard of it. Regarding the Bran Castle near Brasov, Stoker possibly saw an illustration of Castle Bran, Torsberg, in Charles Boner's 1865 book on Transylvania, Its Products and Its People. Although Stoker may have been inspired by its romantic appearance, neither Boner nor Mazzucchelli nor Cross, who also mentioned Torsberg or Torsberg, associate it with Vlad III for the site of his fictitious Castle Dracula. Stoker preferred an empty mountaintop. Stoker's detailed notes reveal he was well aware of the ethnic and geopolitical differences between the Romanians, Wallachs, Wallachians, descendants of the Dacians, the Zeklers, allies of the Magyars or Hungarians, whose interests were opposed to that of the Wallachians. In the novel's originally typewritten manuscript, the Count speaks of throwing off the, quote, Austrian yoke, unquote, which corresponds to this Zekler political point of view. This expression is crossed out and replaced by, quote, Hungarian yoke, unquote, as appearing in the printed version, which matches the historical perspective of the Wallachians. Some take this to mean that Stoker opted for the Wallachian, not the Zekler interpretation, thus lending more consistency to his Count's Romanian identity. Although not identical to Vlad III, the vampire is portrayed as one of the Dracula race. Portrayals. 1921, Dracula's Death, portrayed by Eric Vanko. 1922, Nosferatu, Max Schreck. 1931, Dracula, Bela Lugosi, and Dracula, Carlos Villarreal, Spanish version using the same sets, but with a different cast and crew. 1943, Son of Dracula, Lon Chaney Jr. 1944 and 1945, House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula, starring John Carradine. 1948, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, Bela Lugosi. 1953, Dracula Istanbulda, Atif Kaptan. 1958, Dracula, Christopher Lee. The Return of Dracula, Francis Lederer. 1964, Batman Dracula, Jack Smith. 1966, Dracula, Prince of Darkness, Christopher Lee. Billy the Kid vs. Dracula, John Carradine. 1967, Mad Monster Party, Alan Swift. Blood of Dracula's Castle, Alexander D'Arcy. 1968, Dracula has risen from the grave, Christopher Lee. Dracula, Denham Elliott. Episode of UK TV series Mystery and Imagination. 1969, Las Vampiras, John Carradine. The Magic Christian, starring Christopher Lee. 1970, Count Dracula, Taste the Blood of Dracula. One More Time, Scars of Dracula. Quadecook Vampire, all starring Christopher Lee. And Jonathan, Paul Albert Crumb. 1971, Dracula vs. Frankenstein, Zandor Vorkov. Night Gallery, Francis Lederer. 1972, Blackula, Charles Macaulay. Mad, Mad, Mad Monsters, Alan Swift. Dracula AD 1972, Christopher Lee. Count Dracula's Great Love, Paul Naschy. 1973, The Satanic Rites of Dracula, Christopher Lee. 1974, Bram Stoker's Dracula, Jack Palance. Blood for Dracula, Udo Kier. Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, John Forbes Robertson. Vampira, David Niven. Released in the U.S. as Old Dracula. 1975, Lady Dracula, Stephen Boyd, Germany. 1976, Dracula and Son, Christopher Lee. 1977, Dracula's Dog, Michael Pataki. Count Dracula, Louis Jordan, television film. 1978, Dr. Dracula, John Carradine. 1979, Nosferatu the Vampire, Klaus Kinski. Remake of Nosferatu 1922 with the novel's character names restored. Cliffhangers, Michael Nouri. Episode The Curse of Dracula. Love at First Bite, George Hamilton. Nocturna, John Carradine. Dracula, Frank Langella. The Halloween That Almost Wasn't, Judd Hirsch, television film. 1985, Fraccia vs. Dracula, Edmund Purdom. 1987, The Monster Squad, Duncan Riggier. 1988, Waxwork, Miles O'Keefe. Scooby-Doo and the Ghoul School, Zale Kessler, animated film. Scooby-Doo and the Reluctant Werewolf, Hamilton Camp, animated film. 1989, The Super Mario Bros. Super Show, Jim Ward, episode Bats in the Basement. Captain N the Game Master, Gary Chalk, animated TV series. Superboy, Lloyd Bochner, episode Young Dracula. 1990, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, S. Scott Bullock, episode Spatula, Prince of Darkness. 1990 to 1991, Dracula the series, Geordie Johnson. 1992, Bram Stoker's Dracula, Gary Oldman. 1993, The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, Bob Peck. Bram Stoker's Dracula, Lee Karras Westcott. UFO, Anthony Giorgio. 1994, Monster Force, Robert Boxdale. 1995, Monster Mash, Anthony Crivello. Dracula Dead and Loving It, Leslie Nielsen. 1997, Castlevania, Symphony of the Night, video game. The Creeps, Phil Fondarco. 2000, Dracula 2000, Gerard Butler. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Rudolph Martin. Dark Prince, The True Story of Dracula, Rudolph Martin. 2001, Dracula the Musical, Tom Hewitt. 2002, Dracula Pages from a Virgin's Diary, Zhang Wei Qing. Dracula, Patrick Bergin. 2003, Dracula 2, Ascension, Stephen Billington. Castlevania, Lament of Innocence, video game. 2004, two Van Helsing games. Van Helsing the movie, Van Helsing the video game, starring Richard Roxburgh. Blade Trinity, Dominic Purcell. Dracula 3000, Langley Kirkwood. 2005, Dracula, Wins Dias, Indian Malayalam language television series on Asianet. The Batman vs. Dracula, Peter Stormare, animated film. Dracula 3, Legacy, Rutger Hauer. Castlevania, Curse of Darkness, Douglas Rye, video game. 2005 to 2008, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, Phil Lamar, animated TV series. 2006, Castlevania, Portrait of Ruin, Douglas Rye, video game. Dracula, Mark Warren, television film. 2006 to 2014, Young Dracula, Keith Lee Castle, television series. 2007, Castlevania, The Dracula X Chronicles, Patrick Seitz, video game. 2008, Dracula, Wins Dias, Indian language television series on Gemini TV. Dracula Origin, Kevin Delaney, video game. Supernatural, Todd Stashwick, episode monster movie. Castlevania, Order of Ecclesia, and Castlevania Judgment, starring Patrick Seitz, both video games. The Librarian, Curse of the Judas Chalice, Bruce Davidson. 2009, House of the Wolfman, Michael R. Thomas. Castlevania the Arcade, Castlevania the Adventure Rebirth, both video games. 2010, Castlevania Harmony of Despair, Patrick Seitz, video game. Castlevania Lords of Shadow, Robert Carlyle, video game. 2012, Family Guy, Seth MacFarlane, episode Living on a Prayer. Dracula 3D, Thomas Kretschmann. Hotel Transylvania, Adam Sandler, animated film. Dracula Reborn, Stuart Rigby, television film. 2013, Castlevania, Lords of Shadow, Mirror of Fate, Robert Carlyle, video game. Dracula, John Rhys Meyers, TV series. Dracula 2012, Sudhir Sukumaran, Indian horror film. Dear Dracula, Ray Liotta, animated film. Dracula the Dark Prince, Luke Roberts. 2014, Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2, Robert Carlyle, video game. Dracula Untold, Luke Evans. 2015, Hotel Transylvania 2, Adam Sandler, animated film. 2016, Penny Dreadful, Christian Camargo, TV series. Welcome to Monster High, Michael Sorek, animated film. 2017, Monster High, Electrified, Michael Sorek, animated film. Monster Family, Jason Isaacs, animated film. Escape from Mr. Lemoncello's Library, Alexander Mandra, television film. 2017 to 2018, Monster High, The Adventures of the Ghoul Squad, Michael Sorek, animated TV series. 2017 to 2020, Hotel Transylvania, David Burney and Ivan Sherry, animated TV series. 2017 to 2021, Castlevania, Graham McTavish, animated TV series. 2018, Hotel Transylvania 3, Summer Vacation, Adam Sandler, animated film. Hotel Transylvania 3, Monsters Overboard, Brock Powell, video game. 2019, Van Helsing, Trisha Helfer, TV series. Castlevania, Grimoire of Souls, Jack Merluzzi and Vinay Murthy, video game. 2020, Dracula, Clay's Bang, TV miniseries. Dracula Sir, Anirban Bhattacharya, Indian Bengali language film loosely based on the legend of the Dracula. 2021, Monster Pets, Brian Hull, replacing Adam Sandler. Monster Family 2, Nobody's Perfect, Jason Isaacs, animated film. 2022, Hotel Transylvania, Transformania, Brian Hull, replacing Adam Sandler. Hotel Transylvania, Scary Tale Adventures, Brian Hull, video game. Monster High the Movie, Steve Valentine, television film. Monster High, Ken Marino, animated TV series. Dracula, the original living vampire, Jake Herbert. The Invitation, Thomas Doherty. 2023, Renfield, Nicolas Cage. The Last Voyage of the Demeter, Javier Botet. Renfield, Bring Your Own Blood, video game. 2024, Abigail, Matthew Good. Nosferatu, Bill Skarsgård. 2025, Motel Transylvania, animated TV series. 2025, Dracula, A Love Tale, Caleb Landry Jones. All right, that was a lot. Thank you very much for watching and listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Don't forget, drop a comment down below so we know what you'd like to see next. And until next time, thanks for watching.